Hello everyone, my name is Danielle Harless, and for my accommodation and modification assignment, I have the visually impaired learners. So visually impaired learners are going to be your students that have vision issues that cannot be fixed by any means necessary in terms of wearing glasses, putting in contacts, or any type of surgery will not fix their impairment. Therefore, this includes blind students and those with very low vision. So according to the CDC, 1 to 3% of all students in America are considered visually impaired students. I gathered all my research for this assignment from the CDC, YouTube videos, Google Scholar articles, and I found a website about inclusive teaching that focused solely on visually impaired learners. And then I interviewed a local special ed teacher that I went to high school with. Her name is Allie Light, and she actually helped me with this because she worked with a totally blind student last year. So my first accommodation is going to be the seating in front of the classroom. So it's going to be focused on adjusting where that student is going to sit in the classroom. So a step-by-step of how a teacher should go about using this accommodation would be that putting them in the very front of the classroom as close to the teacher when she's instructing as possible. If the instruction includes physical objects, for example, like rocks or tree bark or anything like that, they should be passed around so that the student can physically feel the aspects of that object instead of just simply looking at its aspects, since they are visually impaired. This accommodation, the use of it will show the teachers that the students are not struggling as much to physically see the words that are written because they're actually hands-on lessons. So sitting in the front of the classroom will be used during the instruction. It won't matter as much in the assessment, so that's why it's only included in instruction when the teacher's up there and the student needs to be looking at them. This also might apply to students who are struggling to focus, because by placing them in the front of the classroom, their eyes are on the teacher and the teacher's eyes are on them. Hearing impaired students may also benefit from sitting in the front of the classroom, because if they're in the back, they're going to have a harder time hearing this instruction. So this applies to them as well as students who are struggling with math or reading. By placing them in the front, this ensures that they are getting the benefit of the entire lesson. They're up there in the front with no distractions. They are eye to eye with the teacher so they can focus. So the second accommodation that I would use for visually impaired learners is audio taped lessons or assignment instructions. This is basically just going to be the teachers recording the lessons. So a quick step-by-step for teachers who are using this accommodation would be they could use it in their lessons and their assignment instructions. They should use some sort of tape recorder or an app to record the lesson or the instructions that they're going to be giving to the student, and then by downloading that recording, they'll have it themselves, and then they can share it with students in the future if they have the same lesson plans, and then the students can listen to it over and over again if they need to, instead of just hearing it that one time instruction. So the teacher would record themselves speaking the directions in simple terms so that the student isn't listening to like 30-minute videos over and over. So this accommodation would allow for the visually impaired students to hear the lessons instead of trying to read them. So these audio taped lessons or assignment instructions will be used in both assessments and instruction, because as well as the teacher teaching and recording her lessons, this could be used in the instruction, or it could be the assignment instructions could be recorded and given to use during assessments. This also may apply to students who frequently need repeated instructions so that the teacher's not having to repeat themselves 30 times a day. They'll just have it there to listen to on their own when they need it. Frequently absent students would also benefit from this because it's hard to catch up if you're not there often. Therefore, the teacher could give them the lessons, recorded lessons from the days they weren't there, and they could use those at any time. As well as English language learners, this would allow them to listen to their teacher and the English words that they're using and study those English words. So the third accommodation that I found would be the use of larger print in the classroom. Larger print is going to apply in pretty much everything in the classroom. Anything that has to do with written words, you can use larger print in. So in terms of posters on the wall, they need to be upsized in font, as well as assignment instructions. If that student does have some sort of vision, those need to be large print as well to help them read them the easiest. If possible, books with larger print and simpler words, therefore they can read them without having to listen to them necessarily all the time. So with this accommodation, the teacher's just going to take their usual assignment and accommodate those visually impaired students by increasing the font size. So posters on the wall are usually typically big anyways because students need to see them from their desks. However, these students that are struggling with vision issues, they're going to struggle to see just normal fonts. They're going to need them to be as big as print as possible. That isn't taking over the whole classroom if the teacher can accommodate those posters. But especially with the assignments that they are given, large print is the best for visually impaired students. And if a teacher can get the group together instead of having them sit at their desks, they could gather as close to the board as possible. This would be great for visually impaired students because they'll be closer up to the instruction instead of sitting at a desk. So this larger print accommodation can be used in assessments and instruction, and it also may apply to students who struggle with reading as well. Students who struggle with reading, necessarily, if it's bigger in their face, then they may be able to sound it out better. It's harder for them when all these little words are grouped up together and they're just trying to get through one letter at a time. So by making these larger prints for them, they can look at the letter individually a lot easier than if it was all jumbled up. The first modification I would use with visually impaired learners would be to allow them to orally present their feedback to the teacher instead of written feedback. So the teacher would modify the instructions or assessments in terms of letting them orally present their answers rather than write them down like the normal students would do in the class. The general students, they would write out the assignment as compared to this student will orally express their answer. So for example, they could be taking a quiz about a book. The teacher would pull the student aside just one-on-one and would ask them the same questions that these other students would be reading to themselves, and then the student would orally answer instead of writing them down like the rest of the class would be. So by orally presenting the feedback, it would mainly be used in assessments, and it may also apply to students who are extroverts because this gives them an opportunity to share verbally their answers with others instead of just sitting to themselves and writing their own answer. They actually get to express it with someone. And this may also assist students who lack confidence because this allows them to verbally say their answers, which allows them to think it out loud and express it to their teacher or even their peers. And this allows them to be confident in what they're saying. My second modification is the use of audiobooks in place of printed books. So essentially the teacher is just going to use audiobooks in class, and instead of having these visually impaired students read printed books, because printed books are hard for them to see if they can see them at all, and that creates a bad relationship between them and books, and it makes them not want to read at all, whether it's being read to them or at all. They struggle with it. So if the teacher can provide audiobooks that relate to the other books that students are reading or any kind of context within those topics in the lesson, that would be so much better for them, because using audiobooks in class, it could be a quiz. They listen to the book and then they have to answer questions based on the text. Or if they have to read so many books a day, this would allow them to not feel like they're getting behind, but they're still gaining knowledge from books just as easily because it's being read to them and they're not struggling to read it. So the use of audiobooks in place of printed books can be used in assessments and the instruction. It may also apply to students who struggle to focus, because reading word after word, page after page, students who struggle to focus may lose focus for having to read that much. So having the audiobooks read to them may keep them entertained as well as engaged with the book instead of getting sidetracked. Students with an IEP may also find this useful, especially if they don't like someone one-on-one looking at them and reading to them, and if they're nonverbal, they especially would like it because they feel like it's just them, and they would honestly feel like they're reading the book. It's just in their ears. English language learners may also benefit from audiobooks because since they're struggling, they're learning the language, therefore they can't just read fluently in English. It's being read to them, which is easier than trying to read something. It's being read to you, which also helps them progress their English speaking. Okay, so my third modification is abbreviated written assignments. So essentially, the teacher is going to abbreviate their assignments that are given to these visually impaired students. It's already difficult for them to see written assignments. Therefore, giving them less of that written assignment is going to help them out in terms of not being stressed and feeling like they're getting behind everybody else by having to take more time to read. So therefore, reducing the amount of that work that is based around writing or reading anything, it's going to modify any classwork for that student. The teacher should use the abbreviated written assignments on pretty much anything in the class for these visually impaired students that includes writing and reading. So abbreviated written assignments would be used in assessments and instruction. If possible, they should be given orally. However, not everything can be, so if it's going to be written, it should be abbreviated. This also may apply to students who struggle to focus, because writing for however long, however much they're required to write, they may lose focus and lose their disengagement for it. Students who struggle with reading, this would also, by giving them less to read and write, they're not going to be as upset with themselves as someone who can fluently read and write. As well as transient students, considering that they're going in between two different schools or two different home schools and online schools, or however their transient is. By giving them that abbreviated work, you have to understand as a teacher that they have other assignments in other schools and classes, and transient students are a little difficult of a topic, but I feel like this is the best modification that they fit into. So thank you for reviewing my modifications and accommodation assignment with me. Thanks.